This is our 2016 Tesla Model S 85D, which means it's all-wheel drive or four-wheel drive, because it's got a dual motor, meaning one motor in the front, one in the back. Again, it's a 2016. It comes equipped with Autopilot version 1 or AP1. The first version they made, which relied on a bunch of sensors toward the front of the car, a camera above the rearview mirror, a radar or LiDAR sensor, and a few others. There are newer versions of this car with newer versions of the Autopilot, but this was the first one, and it worked just fine, actually, to be honest. It's got 19-inch wheels, 245 series, 245/45 series tires. It's got a trunk in the front, otherwise known as a frunk, that can actually hold a decent amount of stuff. Right now all we've got is our shooting hearing protectors and some ammo in it, but it's big enough actually you can hold a full-length AR-15 or like golf clubs. Maybe not the biggest golf clubs, but it's got a decent amount of room. You can fit at least one suitcase in there, a bunch of bags. Some people use it to put their cooler, store their cooler, because it doesn't heat up in the interior when the interior is exposed to sun. They redid the front end styling in, I think, 2017. And also the front is a little bit bigger if you've got the two-wheel drive version, because the drive motor actually sits right about there. And so it takes a little bit of your frunk storage away, but it's absolutely worth it in terms of the amount of traction and the amount of security it gives you to have all-wheel drive, because we've driven a rear-wheel drive version of this thing, and it is a handful. It is constantly trying to spin out on you because it's got so much power. You know, we've had it 2 years, put 50,000 miles on it, and we haven't had any accidents. The car is a Carfax zero accident vehicle, but it's got like a little smudge there. I'm not sure what from. A little scratch right there. You know, we got two teenagers in the house, so stuff's gonna bump into the car. A couple little scratches there. I don't know if you can see it. A couple little scratches or bumps there. Paint's in good shape. The wheels are in good shape too. There's like a little bit of almost like rock damage or something. I'm not sure how that happened. And then it's like the slightest bit off with that front bumper, because actually either in the snow or maybe it hit a curb. I can't remember what. Like when it was being parked by a person I won't name. But otherwise it's got no issues, and it's in great shape. In terms of the paint, there's no bubbling or rippling. The door handles retract and extend without any trouble. I don't think it's got much of any curb rash either. The wheels are in fine shape. The tires are, it's September, so the tires were new in January. They're 8 months old. They're Michelin run flats, and I think they're V-rated if I'm not mistaken. Doesn't really matter so much, but I'm sure they are, because the car itself can go well upwards of 100 miles, 130 miles an hour. The rear hatch area, it actually holds a gigantic amount of cargo. We are here at Costco, and you know those big flatbeds that you get at Costco? You can fit like 1.5, almost 2 of those flatbeds full of stuff into the vehicle. It's got like as much room as a large SUV in terms of cargo. Like think about like in terms of a Tahoe, not quite a Suburban, maybe the Short Expedition. I mean, it can hold an absolutely tremendous amount of cargo. It's also got this compartment under the load floor, because the car doesn't have a lot of stuff taking up room inside it. I mean, it doesn't have a drivetrain with a drive shaft going down the middle. It doesn't have a muffler and exhaust system. The battery is at the floor level and it's flat, and so there's just nothing taking up space in the vehicle, and so as a result it has an absolutely tremendous amount of storage. The back seats go down It's actually enough room to where you can camp out in the back overnight, like if it almost like van camping. Okay. Sorry, it locked itself again. I gotta unlock it. As stated, the door handles retract and extend without any trouble. The back seats, I'm not going to say they have a huge amount of space, but you can definitely fit 2 adults in the back. 3 is like, I don't know. You got to be really good friends, or maybe related, in order to fit 3 in the back. But it can be done. And again, the floor completely flat. There's no drive shaft hump or anything like that. And the seats themselves, they have headrests built in, which is obviously nice for safety. And things of that nature. The interior, it's all leather seats. I think the interior was redone for 2016. It's got this very large 17-inch screen, which is in portrait mode. So in terms of driving, it might sound like hyperbole, or it might sound like exaggeration, but this is absolutely the most fun car we've ever driven. And we've driven dozens and dozens of cars. You know, Mercedes, BMWs, sports cars, Porsches, you name it. This is by far the most fun car that a lot of people will ever drive. It's very heavy. It's somewhere between 4,500, 4,800 pounds, but it just takes off like a bat out of hell. And the power is instantaneous. It comes on immediately at any speed because, of course, it's got an electric drivetrain, which doesn't have to, you know, wind up, get up on the cam, or get turbo boost built up in it like a gasoline or a conventional, you know, diesel engine, that type of thing. As soon as you press the pedal, it launches immediately and at maximum torque. The car itself, the meter here goes up to 300 kilowatts, which is 400 horsepower, give or take. And again, there's no downshifting, there's no waiting. You hit the gas and it takes off on you. It just leaps ahead. And you get used to it very quickly, and any other car you get into, it just feels like a huge disappointment, relatively speaking. In addition to taking off in a hurry, it's got what you might think of as engine braking, where as soon as you release the throttle or start to let up on it, I don't know how much you can tell in terms of the vehicle squatting, but it goes into a very aggressive engine braking mode, otherwise known as regen braking, in the sense that the drive motors stop propelling the vehicle and they start actively opposing the forward motion of the vehicle, so that it slows down quite notably, to the extent that you hardly ever use the brakes, the friction brakes. So we're coming onto a light that's just turning red, and all we had to do was let off the gas, and it slowed down, and it's slowing down almost to a complete stop. You know, after it gets below about 10, yeah, you need to get on the brakes and hold the car with the brakes. In the newer vehicles, which have something called the Raven powertrain, either the front or the rear motor is a permanent magnet motor, and it can actually bring the vehicle to a complete stop and hold it, so you don't ever need to use the brakes unless it's like an emergency, or unless you have to stop faster than the vehicle wants to stop itself using regen braking. But you know, that's the net effect is that in 50,000 miles of owning this vehicle, we have never once had to get the brake pads changed, get the brake rotors turned or replaced, do anything with the braking system, because the fact that you use it so seldom. And so, and you really get used to the idea of, you know, kind of feathering the throttle to accelerate, slow down as needed. It's called one pedal driving. And again, the effect, the feeling is similar to in a manual transmission car when you're cruising at maybe 5th gear and then you downshift into third gear or second gear when you're slowing down for a corner, so you can make use of all that engine braking in order to slow the vehicle down, start to rotate it into the turn without having to use up your brakes and cook your brakes. And that's the exact same sensation you get. You feel like you're in some type of, I don't know, on like a road course or something. And again, it makes it a tremendous pleasure to drive this car. Again, even though it's a very, very heavy sedan with more than 4,000 pounds, more than 4,500 pounds of curb weight, closer to 4,800 in some cases, plus passengers. And then you put, 4 200-pound passengers in there, 4 or 5, and you add another, plus luggage, and you're looking at 5,500, 5,800 pounds. And even so, it still takes off like a rocket. It's got this 17-inch screen, which is nice. You don't have to spend a lot of time looking at it. It gives you directions on the screen. It also gives you directions on the dashboard. And unlike the Model 3 or the Model Y, this has a dashboard in addition to the big center screen, which we really appreciate for a number of reasons. The first is that when you want to check your speed or check any of the gauges, you look down. You don't look down and to the right and try to find your information on this big screen. There's a speedometer where a speedometer should be. There's also on your left, you can set up those, you can configure those screens as needed. But on your left is, again, we're merging onto the highway. And all you gotta do is put your foot down, and next thing you know, you're going well above the speed limit. You have to actively try to keep yourself from hitting triple-digit speeds. On the left, you have your navigation, which tells you your short-term, turns that are coming up. Okay, we're taking an exit here in 0.3 miles, it says on the right. Great. On the right, you got your energy consumption, which you don't really need to pay much attention to. You heard the autopilot turn on and off. Pretty much any time we have the ability to use it, we use autopilot because it just makes your life so much easier. It keeps the car inside the lane. We could actually be using it now on this off-ramp. It's very, very good. It's exceptionally good at recognizing the lane dividers and keeping the car centered inside them and detecting traffic ahead of you. So here. Okay, so autopilot's on, set for 45, and it's slowing itself down to a complete stop because it locks onto the car ahead of it, which it turns blue. It represents as out of all the vehicles ahead of and around it, it turns that one blue. And then when that vehicle takes off, autopilot starts the car moving again. It's not as sophisticated as some of the newer versions. This is a 5-year-old car, but in 95% of the scenarios you're gonna face, it is absolutely all you need. And again, in terms of its ability here to lock on to the vehicle ahead of you and match its speed and not wait too long to put the brakes on and not put them on too early, it is practically perfect. We've driven a lot of other cars with a lot of other similar systems. We've driven a newer Model S that has autopilot version 2.5, and it's really not any better in that regard. It can do more fancy, sophisticated tricks like navigating, through the on and off ramps and changing lanes by itself without you even having to use the signal. But that's all, superfluous. All that really matters is that the vehicle can keep itself inside the lane dividers, which this one can exceptionally well, and that it can monitor the flow of traffic and speed up or slow down as needed. Again, we're not doing anything here with the steering or the brakes or the gas, and the car is doing all the driving. It's spectacular. And once you get used to it, it's very hard to go back to anything else. We'll turn off autopilot for now. The screen, it has your navigation. It's got your whole turn-by-turn list right there. It tells you what your battery's going to be when you get there. It can actually do what your battery's going to be when you get back to where you started that trip. It's got your route, you know, just like Google Maps. But with the benefit of this system over Google Maps is that it gives you a tremendously detailed map. Just absolutely flawless, absolutely spectacular. And then your entertainment is there, and you can choose your different AM, FM radio, XM radio, your phone. It's got some streaming channels built in. It's got your yacht rock if you're from the 70s or 80s, Southern rock, that type of thing. Your climate control, really all you need to do is set it on whatever temperature you want, leave it on auto, and it will take care of things. However, if you're parking, and you can't see it now, but if you park the vehicle, it's got an option to leave the climate control on. So a lot of times, you know, we got our teenagers with us and we're going and doing errands and they want to stay in the car. All you got to do is just set the climate control to stay on, and then they can hit this button here to lock the doors, and they're perfectly safe in the car, and the climate control continues to function. Because it's not running off an engine, it's running off the car's battery, which in this case is 85 kilowatt hours. And it's also got dog mode, and that's for when you want to leave your dog or your cats or whatever in the car. And the entire screen has a big indicator that says, hey, my owner will be back soon. Don't break the windows, I'm doing just fine. It's also got camping mode, and we've actually used that a few times. And what that does is that it leaves the accessories, meaning the 12-volt plug and your USB outlets, operational. It leaves the climate control on. I think it turned the lights off in case you are camping, like during a long road trip, that kind of thing. And you can actually camp in the car, because unlike a conventional vehicle, this thing doesn't have an engine that you're going to be running all night. It just runs off the battery, and it will discharge maybe 5 or 6 or 7% of the battery overnight, running the air conditioner and the accessories and whatever all night. It'll use maybe 5, 6, 7% of the battery. I mean, theoretically, you could camp all weekend in it. In a driving rain or in a snowstorm, doesn't matter. Climate control stays on. You stay warm and dry, or cool and dry, whatever the case may be. Hope you're getting the sense of how easy this thing is to maneuver through traffic or just through town doing your errands. Again, it's the I'm not going to say it's a zippy little car. It's just the easiest thing to drive through town, make all your turns. That regen braking makes a huge difference, because you're not constantly riding the brakes or going from the gas to the brakes and back and forth and back and forth. You're just doing one pedal driving for the most part. Not that we encourage this, but if the light ahead of you turns yellow, you can instantly get on the gas to shoot right through it before it turns red. We don't encourage that, by the way. You get into bumper-to-bumper traffic, and in a manual transmission car, which we have, of which we have one now, or in even an automatic car, it's just such a hassle. You're on the brakes, you're on the gas, you're speeding up, you're slowing down, you're trying to make sure too much of a gap doesn't open, so that someone can cut in and, you know, cut you off. And that's just not an issue. You can adjust your following distance using that knob right there. You just rotate it. You just rotate it like that. And if you see, we just generally keep it at 1. And I'm not sure if that's 1 car length or what that is, but that's the following distance that we set, and it works fine. It doesn't ride you up into the bumper of the vehicle ahead of you. It keeps a perfectly fine distance. And if you want to close it up, you just get on the gas a little bit. No big deal. To change lanes, when you're on a highway or you're on a 4-lane road in the city, just like this, no big deal. You put the turn signal on, and it changes lanes. Put the turn signal on, it changes lanes. What it doesn't do is stop at red lights or stop signs. This car doesn't. Even autopilot version 2 or 2.5 does not. Full self-driving or FSD is what you need in order to stop it. Have the car stop for you. It's stop signs and red lights. But in reality, who is so lazy that they can't just stop their car when that light turns red? Nobody. If you're taking off too hard in this car, in about the last month, it's developed what we would describe as just like a quiet sort of like tapping noise, almost like you're cracking your knuckles coming from the right rear. And we're not sure if that's a bushing or what that is. It's not really of too much concern. Other than that, there are absolutely no issues with this vehicle. We had to have the front drive motor replaced, about a year or so ago, because when we would charge it, actually when we would supercharge it in hot weather at one of those Tesla superchargers, which is a very, very high energy, high current, high power charger. It's like a 120 kilowatts of 400 volt DC. So that's like hundreds of amps of current. Generates a ton of heat. And for some reason it was messing with the front drive motor. And you see it's got us coming right up to our destination here. 300 feet, 200, 100. It's really, really hard to miss your turns in this car. If you miss your turns, there's just something wrong with you. But in any case, again, we got this car spring of 2019. We noticed it in the summer of 2019, summer of 2020. Every now and then when we were supercharging in very hot weather, it would give us this message that said, front motor disabled, power reduced. And it would actually do what it said. It would disable the front motor. And so it would be getting all of its energy from the rear motor. And there was quite a substantial reduction in power. And so we had it fixed under warranty, no big deal. Got a brand new front drive motor, either new or rebuilt. We've also had to have the screen replaced. At one point it died and it could not be brought back to life, so we had it replaced, I think 18 months ago or so. But other than that, we've had no issues. A lot of people have issues with the screen developing little bubbles around the edges, and we have not had that. The screen is in perfect shape. The refresh rate, it's pretty good and fast. You move it, it just works. And that's the sense you get about the entire car. It just works. This was Tesla's first mass-produced vehicle. And so you'd think it would have all kinds of rough edges. Some people have complained about the panel gaps. We've had no issues with panel gaps. Let's show you that thing with the climate control. So if you hit the little fan, when you're parked, you see how it says off? That means when you get out of the car, the climate control turns off. When you hit on, that means it's going to stay on. And that's helpful if you leave your teenagers in the car so they can, use their devices while you're out shopping. Dog mode. So watch this. Well, when we get out, dog mode would have the big screen that comes up. And then camp mode. Camp mode just, again, leaves the climate control running. I think it turns off the exterior lights. Leaves the climate control and the accessories running so that you can camp out in the car overnight or for an entire weekend if you want. Or maybe if there's a blackout and you lose your air conditioning in your house or your heat during cold weather, you can actually camp out in the car for an entire weekend easily, or longer. As long as you have enough energy to get to the charger, because I don't think the Tesla superchargers experience blackouts to the same extent that residential neighborhoods do. Commercial areas like your Target stores, wherever a supercharger happens to be located, generally speaking, they don't lose power. So that's it for the interior. Again, the seats are leather. These ones are gray. And they're just absolutely hugely supportive and comfortable. They recline all the way. The front seats do. The front seats have heat, which you just control right here with these buttons here. No big deal. That's the right one. That's the left one. You got your defrost, your front defrost, your rear defrost. That controls your volume for your stereo. So does this. And then this knob controls, at least the way we've got it set now, it controls the climate control, sets the temperature. The dashboard is trimmed out in, it's like Alcantara leather. And so is the headliner. The sunroof, so the roof itself is got this huge panoramic sunroof. We don't even use it hardly at all. And you control that by, you just hit this button on the bottom left, which is like a picture of the vehicle, sunroof, open. And that opens it. We use it probably less than once a month. And it opens pretty far. And then there's like a fixed section that does not open. And so the rear seat passengers get a tremendous view. And then you just hit that to close it. And it closes, no issues. Never leaked on us, never caused any trouble. The windows themselves have not given us any issues at all. They all open and close just fine. The switches work perfectly fine. The switches actually are sourced from the same supplier that supplied Mercedes-Benz with their switches. You know, you got your child-proof switch right there. Your rear windows, your front windows, they all have auto down, auto up. And you'll notice with this car itself, it has frameless windows. So when you open them, it's like a lot of cars from the 70s or maybe 80s. Like an old Camaro or something from the 80s. You can tell a lot of the engineers for this car grew up around that time frame. The mirrors, left and right power mirrors, that's that control for them. That's a separate control for folding them. They also fold automatically when you park. We put in bubble mirrors on the left and right because they completely illuminate or give you complete visibility into your blind spots. And you start to get older, you know, like us, we're middle age. You don't want to have to turn your neck all the way back every time you want to change lanes. If you get little bubble mirrors, get used to them, you'll never have that problem with blind spots. The rear view mirror itself, I think it automatically dims at night. I'm not sure. It's got map lights. No big deal. Again, everything about this car just works. You got your armrest. You slide it back. You got a cup holder here. Same thing for the passenger. You got cup holders on the floor, and you can adjust them in size if you see that. You know, if you're drinking like a Slurpee or something, a big gulp. We just leave them set that way, and they work just fine for us. You can also close that thing. There's a little compartment here for whatever else you need to do. The glove compartment opens with this button here. No big deal. This is the blinker switch. The vents themselves, there's two on the dash, one on the left and right of that speedometer, and then another two on that side. They work just fine, no issues at all. Again, the climate control, the best thing you can do is just leave it in auto. If you want to schedule it to warm up or cool the car for if you have like an early commute or something, you can do that. We've never really bothered. The door handles themselves, you know, they just work. These big things here are like grab handles for the doors. And again, the bottom line with this car is that it just works. The reason we're getting rid of it is because we do a lot of long road trips. We drive from where we live in Southeast Michigan down to Georgia, Florida on a pretty routine basis. We drive to DC all the time. And that's a 500-mile trip. We've got a VW Passat TDI with the diesel. With that VW, you can get 500 miles down the road on about 3/4 of a tank. And so you just don't have to worry about it. You get on the road, drive 500 miles, and next thing you know, you're in DC. In this car, it's a little more complicated because you do have to stop and charge it about every 2.5 hours. So about every 150, 175 miles, you're going to need to stop and charge it at a supercharger. And it has an EPA range of something like 270 miles, but the practical range is a lot less than that, because you're not going from 100% down to 0% when you take a trip. You're going from about 80% or maybe 90 down to 20%. So you're really only using the middle 60% of the battery in order to prolong its life. If you go from 100 to 0, all the way from 100 down to 0 routinely, you will start to wear out the battery. And so that's why it's recommended to go from about 80% down to about 20%. And so 20% of a battery with 270 miles is around 50 miles of reserve range on the bottom end, and about 220 miles on the top end. So you're going from 220 down to 50. And that's about 170 miles, 170, maybe 180 miles. And that's really as far as you ought to take this car, unless it's some kind of emergency. And so that means for a trip like the one we take to DC a lot, you know, you're stopping, if the charging stations were spaced perfectly, you could do it with 2 stops, because you'd stop at 170 miles, 180 miles, whatever, and then you'd stop again at 360 miles, and then you'd get there on your final 140 mile leg. No big deal. But in reality, the charging stations are not spaced perfectly. So it actually, you know, we end up stopping at the first charging station, I think is like 120 miles, and then we charge another one, another 120 or 130 miles. And so we end up taking 3 charging stops on a 500 mile road trip. And that means that we're driving, instead of 8 hours, it's about an 11-hour trip, maybe 10 hours, 10 and a half hours. And that starts to eat into our time a lot. We've driven this car to Las Vegas, all the way from Michigan. That's about a 2,000 mile road trip, and that took us quite a bit of time. We found, like, in a place like Nebraska, which is, you know, it's flat and it's straight, for 450 miles. We were passing the same traffic and then stopping to charge, passing the same traffic again, stopping to charge, passing this, you know, and that just gets a little bit old. And so that's the reason we're getting rid of this car. It just, you know, for the amount of driving we do, which is about 50,000 miles a year, spread out across all of our vehicles, of which we have about a dozen, you know, this thing just isn't really suitable to be doing 4,000 mile round trips, you know, to Las Vegas, or 1,000 mile round trips to DC. It's just not quite practical for that. If all you did 99% of the time was you drive to and from work, and say you have a charging station at work, like a lot of offices do now, you could theoretically drive 150 miles out, charge at work or whatever, and then drive 150 miles home in the space of, call it 2 hours out, 2 hours back. That's 4 hours. And some people actually make that long of a commute every single day. We never would, but some people would. And this car would be absolutely perfect for that, because you're not burning any gas. And oh, by the way, we have unlimited free supercharging with this thing. And I'm not sure if that carries over to the next owner. There's a little bit of wiggle room there as to whether, well, if you do a private sale, that unlimited free supercharging carries over. It's not entirely clear. And there's a code in the car that we're going to have to check next time we log into our account to see if it's transferable or not. But again, if you're the kind of person that commutes maybe an hour to work, maybe 50 or 60 or 70 miles, and then even if you don't have a charging station at work, this car will easily do a 70-mile commute to the office, or 75, whatever, 80, and then another 80 miles back. 160 miles, that's no big deal. And again, you're not burning any gas. And if you charge it at home, like most people do, well then, all you're using is electricity. And this thing, if you pay for just the electricity, I think they said it gets the equivalent of like 120 miles to the gallon. For the amount of money you're spending on electricity, you would spend the same amount of money on a car that got 120 miles to the gallon. So it's like 2.5 times as dollar efficient as a Prius, because a Prius gets about 50 miles to the gallon. So does our Passat turbo diesel. And so what does that mean? So the battery's 85 kilowatt hours. If you have to charge it from 20 to 80% every night, that's the middle 60%. So call that about 50 kilowatt hours. Say you're paying 20 cents a kilowatt hour, more like 15 cents a kilowatt hour. So that's about $7.50 if I got that right. 50 kilowatt hours times 15 cents a kilowatt hour. You're paying $7.50 per night if you charge it at home for 160 miles of range. Okay? And so there's nothing wrong with that as far as we're concerned. And if you charge it at work because your office has a charging station, then you're paying nothing, typically. And you're just, and all you're doing is running the miles. The car doesn't have an engine. The maintenance on it is, the routine maintenance is basically nothing, in the sense that you're not having to change oil. You're not having to replace your timing belt and water pump. You're not having to change out your clutch or do any maintenance on an automatic transmission. All the moving parts in this vehicle are sealed, okay? And so it's not as if like you're going to be going back and forth to the mechanic, because there's just none of that. There's no turbo to burn up your oil, or to create, you know, overpressure in your combustion chambers and blow your cylinder heads. There's none of that stuff. And so that's kind of cool. Teslas have gone 400,000 miles and not needed substantial maintenance. Again, this one had some type of unknown situation with the front motor. We had it replaced. It's not a common fault because we mentioned it on the Facebook groups and nobody had ever heard of it. And so that told us that it's not some type of an endemic problem. The types of maintenance problems that people tend to have with this car is stuff like bubbles forming in the display. We haven't had that. Or like sometimes the window regulators, the window motors die. Hasn't happened to us. Sometimes the door handles don't pop out when they're supposed to, or they won't retract when they're supposed to. We haven't had that kind of trouble. The brakes, you're not doing maintenance on the brakes because you're not hardly using the brakes. And so again, a big heavy car that you tend to put a lot of heavy use onto, you know, with a lot of acceleration, hard acceleration and slowing down, you'd think, well, God, you must go through a set of brakes every 10,000 miles. Doesn't happen because you're not using the brakes for the most part, because the vehicle itself, using the electric motors, is slowing itself down. Unless, of course, you go so fast that the engine braking or the regen braking, which is very, very aggressive to begin with, just quite isn't good enough. And in that case, yeah, you might have to change your pads and rotors more than we do. And again, we've had this vehicle 50,000 miles, have not had to touch them. There isn't the slightest bit of shaking or shimmying from the brake system. They're in practically pristine condition. All right, well, I hope that's a good enough overview of this car to give you a sense of it. I mean, we love it to death. The only reason we're getting rid of it, again, is because of the fact that we take a lot of long road trips, and, you know, we just need a car that'll go a little bit farther than 160, 175, 180 miles before you have to stop and charge it. And so we're getting a newer Tesla, probably a 2020 or maybe a 2021 Model Y. That has a 324 mile range. And again, if you take the middle 60% of that, that's like, you know, the practical cruising range is like 225, 250-ish range miles. And that's more like, instead of 2.5 hours, that's more like 3.5, 4 hours. And that's all we need to do at our age. All right, well, I think that's enough talking, and I hope you enjoyed this description of our car. So in terms of living with the car and just sort of using it day in and day out, it has a lot of features that just make it a pleasure. The first of which is when you walk up to it, it unlocks itself. The door handles extend. And you see those frameless windows, kind of like in the 70s or 80s. And so you don't have to unlock the doors. When the vehicle senses that the key is nearby, it just unlocks the doors automatically for you and extends those handles out to you, which is kind of nice. And when you want to start it, you don't have to push a button or do anything with your key. Your key stays in your pocket all the time. There's no power button or anything like that. All you do is step on the brake and you're ready to go. It's got a seatbelt warning. So when we do what I just did, when you press the brake, the car basically wakes up. And you don't have to do anything else besides get in the car, sit down, and step on the brake, and it's ready to go. Switch into reverse, make sure the camera's clear, or if you're old like us, you just look behind you to make sure there isn't anybody coming. Because we're from the days before you had rear view cameras. The brakes are extremely easy to modulate. You get a ton of feedback from the brake pedal. And unlike a lot of hybrids or other electric cars, all the brake pedal does is it activates the friction brakes, the mechanical brakes. You don't have some combination of regen braking and mechanical braking when you're on the brake pedal, which gives you a sort of unpredictable, kind of spongy sort of feeling. No, the brake pedal, all it does is that it controls the friction brakes. And so you get a very consistent feel, a very solid pedal feel, good feedback, extremely good feedback in terms of what the brakes are doing. You can control the brakes very, very precisely with that brake pedal when you need it, because most of the time you don't need it because the vehicle is doing regen braking with the electric motors slowing the car down. We live in Southeast Michigan, and this is basically the perfect car for Michigan because it does not care what the weather is. It is perfectly comfortable and confident on dry roads, on rainy roads, on snow-covered roads. It has absolutely tremendous traction in the snow, much more than any pickup truck or SUV or off-road vehicle we've ever driven. Extreme amounts of confidence and predictability. It's almost like one of those winter rally driving cars. The first time we ever drove it in snow, we were astounded by the level of traction and level of predictability and stability and control it offered us. The one thing to be careful when you're driving in the snow is the fact that the car it doesn't have a ton of ground clearance. It's got maybe 3 to 5 inches of ground clearance. And so, if you've got deep snow in your driveway, which we tend to have, it can do some damage to that front bumper or the little lip on the front. So you just need to be cognizant of that fact. It's not going to be an issue on snowy roads or that kind of thing because the snow tends to be packed down pretty well. But if you're driving through 6 inches or a foot of snow, traction-wise, the vehicle will have no trouble with it. But the front bumper and the front spoiler or splitter are not going to be happy with you. But as we said, it gives you an absolutely tremendous feeling of confidence and security to drive this thing in the snow, really in any weather. It's just got no issues. Another thing we're going to mention is people might not be sure exactly how this works, but In terms of the controls, this shifter comes from Mercedes, and to put it in park, you just press the button. To put it in drive, step on the brakes, push it down, and you're in drive. Okay? If you need to go into neutral for some reason, just sort of flip it up a little bit, and now you're in neutral. You very rarely need to use neutral. And then step on the brakes again, flip it down to drive, and you're good to go. You can very easily go back and forth between reverse and drive. It makes it, super easy when you're backing out of a space, you're in reverse, you just flip that lever, it goes into drive, and you're out of there. They've just put a ton of effort into making this a very easy, very practical, I'm not going to say idiot-proof, but just tremendous pleasure to drive in every way. Handling-wise, the handling is tight. It almost feels like you're driving one of those big, heavy S-Class Mercedes from the 80s, where you can tell it's a very, very big, very heavy vehicle, but the steering gives you a ton of feedback. Even though it's electric steering, it's a big, thick rim, very easy to grip onto, and it just gives you a ton of feedback through the wheel. So, at any speed, we've had this, I think we've had it up to 125 or so, and it never feels like it's floating. It never feels like it's coming loose or like you don't know what the front wheels are doing. You have a tremendous sensory connection to the wheels with this steering wheel. And the ride, it's got steel springs. It's not the air suspension version. It's got steel springs, and it's got a firm but well-controlled ride. I'll put it like that. It's kind of the opposite of our Passat, our 2015 Passat TDI, which also has steel springs, but it just sort of, that car just sort of feels like you're floating. And the rim, the steering wheel, it's a lot thinner. You don't get a ton of feedback through it. And in terms of the sensory, the connection between the rim and the wheels, there's a little bit of vagueness, a little bit of numbness, just a little bit. I mean, it's not enough to be dangerous or to bother you, but you do notice it. It doesn't feel like one of those Cadillacs or like a Lincoln from the 80s, where it feels like it's connected with ropes to the front wheels. But no, that car gives you somewhat less feedback than this one does. And again, this steering wheel, you have tremendous steering feel, steering precision. The ride, again, very, very well damped, well controlled. It's not going to rattle your teeth. It's not a very stiff or a firm ride. You will feel the bumps, but you're not going to feel them very hard. You just, it gives you that feeling, like I said, of a Mercedes from the late 80s, that old S-Class. It just felt like you were driving a tank. And again, that feeling is a tremendous confidence building type feeling. Whether you're driving in the city, whether you're driving on the highway at 60 or 80, whether you're driving in Nebraska and you're going 120, you never have a feeling the car is trying to get away from you, or it's about to, put you into a ditch, or about to try to spin out. The all-wheel drive makes a tremendous difference in that regard. We've driven a rear-wheel drive 85, I think it was a P85D, had a little more power, and it just gave you that sensation like it was trying to come around on you if you gave it too much juice, too much throttle. And if you weren't careful, if you didn't dial in the steering exactly right, it was gonna be swapping ends on you. And that was the rear-wheel drive version. We have the all-wheel drive, and again, no issues, no drama whatsoever. It just goes where you point it with authority. So we don't want to carry on and on about it, but it shocked the hell out of us when we got this car, because we just didn't know what it was going to be like. We didn't know how well calibrated the steering was going to be. This is Tesla's first volume production car that they've ever made in the history of the company. And so you just wonder, is it well sorted out? Is it well tuned, dynamically? And you can tell they did their homework with this car. in terms of sorting it out and making it a tremendous pleasure to drive dynamically. Now, there are going to be some people who say, well, no, you know, we like our 911, our 1975 Porsche 911, that gives you better feel, or, you know, our Ferrari, or the BMW 3 Series from the year 2001. Well, maybe so. And when you take this onto a track, it's not exactly a track car. It's more like an Autobahn cruiser, or something you would take on a 1,000-mile road trip, which we have on several occasions, in complete comfort. And you're going to arrive fully rested, and you're not going to be exhausted from fighting the steering wheel or anything like that. The only issue with taking this car on a long trip is the charging, and we've talked about that. And that's basically why we're getting rid of it. If we were a typical, you know, if all we did was commute to and from the office, to and from, you know, the kids' school, soccer practice, that kind of thing, this would be the perfect car for that, because of the fact that it's such a fun vehicle to drive, the fact that it'll get you about 160 to 180 miles comfortably on a charge. You know, you can stretch it to 200, you know, maybe 200 plus, but you're not going to want to go that much further. But very few people go anywhere near that far in the course of a day. That's why the Chevy Volt only came out with like a 35-mile range in the first generation, which I think they extended to like 50 or 55, because they realized that's the most that anybody typically drives in the course of a day, or the course of a one-way commute. But no, we put a lot of miles on. We go, you know, some days we're going a couple thousand miles in the course of a week, 10,000 miles in the course of a month. We've done that before. And in this particular car, we got it with just over 30,000 miles, and now it's got around 85,000 miles, and it feels the exact same at 85 as it did at 35. And if we kept it to 150,000 miles, we have no doubt that it would feel exactly the same, and have the, you know, it wouldn't be slowing down, it wouldn't be loosening up on us, starting to lose its mojo and just feel sloppy. The body is still very tight. It doesn't have those sort of squeaks and rattles that you typically experience in a car that's starting to show its age. And so again, other than the fact that we drive a ton of miles and we do a lot of towing, which you can't really do with an EV, we would have no reason not to keep this vehicle. But for the two reasons we just mentioned, yeah, unfortunately, we're going to be getting rid of it. Anyway, thanks a lot, everyone. We will talk to you later.